I never expected my friend's mom to look at me that way, or to tell me I was too young to be so bold, but that she liked it. I didn't think much of it when my friend asked me to come by his place that afternoon. It was just supposed to be another casual hangout, video games, snacks, maybe some lazy talk about plans that would never happen. But the moment I stepped into his house, I sensed a shift in the air. The living room was quiet, bathed in soft afternoon light filtering through half-drawn curtains. Wooden floors caught the sun in warm streaks, and a faint trace of coffee hung in the air, still fresh, as though someone had just left the kitchen. I set my backpack down, waiting for my friend to appear. Instead, it was his mother who walked in. She moved with a kind of unhurried grace that immediately caught me off guard. She wasn't dressed to impress, just a soft cardigan over a simple blouse, her hair pulled loosely back as though comfort mattered more than style. But somehow, that simplicity only magnified her presence. She carried herself like someone who knew exactly who she was. Confident, yes, but there was something quieter beneath it, something vulnerable I couldn't quite name. She smiled when she saw me, the kind of smile that lingers just a second too long, as though it's considering you before fully forming. "He'll be down in a minute," she said, her voice warm, touched with an ease that made me feel both comfortable and suddenly very aware of myself. I tried to respond casually, but the way she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear caught my attention more than it should have. It was such a small thing, yet it drew me in, like noticing the flicker of a flame in a dimly lit room. For a while, the silence between us wasn't awkward. It was observant. She asked me about school, about work, the usual small talk. But the way she listened was different. She didn't glance at her phone or rush through the exchange the way most adults did when talking to someone my age. Her eyes stayed fixed on me, steady, curious. It was the kind of attention that made you want to speak honestly, even about trivial things. And in that attention, I began to notice more. The faint lines at the corners of her eyes that deepened when she smiled. The softness of her hands as she adjusted her sleeve. Even the rhythm of her breathing when she paused before answering me. They were small details, yet each one seemed magnified in the stillness of that moment. I caught myself studying her, more than I should have. And she seemed to notice. There was a flicker in her gaze, the briefest narrowing of her eyes as if she could sense my curiosity but chose not to call it out. Instead, she let it hang there, suspended, unspoken. My friend's footsteps upstairs eventually broke the spell, the ordinary sounds of daily life rushing back in. But something had already shifted. That first quiet meeting, bathed in sunlight, layered with glances and pauses, wasn't ordinary at all. It was the beginning of something I couldn't yet name, but I knew I wouldn't forget. Dinner was simple, nothing out of the ordinary: roast chicken, salad, warm bread on the side. My friend sat across from me, half distracted by his phone, while his mom moved between the table and the kitchen with the kind of ease that made the space feel alive. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't trying to impress. She was simply present, and somehow that made everything about her more noticeable. I caught myself watching the way she set a dish down, the slight tilt of her head when she asked if we needed more to drink. Every small gesture had weight, as though she carried her own gravity. And though I tried to keep my focus on the food, on the casual chatter with my friend, my attention kept drifting back to her. When he finally excused himself to take a call upstairs, it was just the two of us again. The silence stretched for a moment, not awkward, just charged. She sat across from me, resting her chin lightly against her hand, studying me in a way that made me feel both exposed and strangely important. "You don't say much," she remarked, her tone playful, like she was testing the waters. I smiled faintly. "I say enough. I just don't waste words." Her brow arched slightly, a flicker of amusement lighting her expression. "Confident, aren't you?" I met her eyes without looking away. "I think honesty comes across as confidence. Most people just aren't used to hearing it." For a beat, she didn't respond. Then, slowly, a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. She leaned back, folding her arms, as though assessing me from a new angle. "You're too young to be so bold." She paused just long enough for the words to sink in. "But I like that." The phrase hit harder than I expected. My chest tightened, my pulse quickened. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. The warmth in her voice, the teasing edge in her smile, the way her gaze didn't flinch. I laughed softly, trying to play it off, but the air between us felt different now, heavier somehow. "Should I take that as a compliment or a warning?" I asked. "Maybe both," she replied, her tone light but her eyes steady. Something unspoken passed between us in that moment, an acknowledgement, a recognition that this was more than casual banter. I could feel it in the way my shoulders leaned just slightly forward, in the way her fingers traced the rim of her glass without thought. The conversation drifted after that, but every word carried undertones. She asked about my ambitions, about what I wanted out of life, and I answered honestly, more openly than I usually would. There was something about her presence that demanded sincerity. And every time I spoke, she listened with a kind of attentiveness that made me feel seen in a way I rarely did. By the time my friend returned, the atmosphere had shifted. Outwardly, nothing had changed, we were still sitting at the same table, finishing the same meal. But inside, I knew the ground had tilted. Her playful teasing had drawn a line, and my boldness had crossed it. The words "I like that" lingered in my mind long after the plates were cleared. They weren't just a comment. They were an opening. The evening stretched on lazily, the kind of night where time seemed to slow. My friend had disappeared upstairs again, something about helping a buddy fix his computer, and suddenly, it was just the two of us in the quiet hum of the house. I found myself standing in the kitchen, rinsing my plate, trying to busy my hands so I wouldn't get lost in my thoughts. She was there too, gathering dishes, moving with a rhythm that felt both practical and graceful. The soft light above the counter traced the lines of her profile, catching in her hair as she leaned over the sink. "You don't have to help with this," she said gently, though not dismissively. "I don't mind," I replied. "Besides, it's unfair to leave you with all the work." She glanced at me, and for the briefest second, her eyes softened, like she wasn't used to being considered that way. It was such a small thing, but I felt it. We worked side by side, the clink of dishes and the low hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. But eventually, she broke it. "You know," she began slowly, almost like she was testing how the words would sound out loud, "most of the time, people see me only as the mom. They don't ask how I'm doing, what I want. It's just assumed that my life revolves around everyone else." Her voice was steady, but underneath it, there was a tremor of vulnerability. I looked at her carefully. She wasn't fishing for pity. She was revealing a truth that had been carried alone for too long. "That sounds lonely," I said softly. She didn't answer right away. She wiped her hands on a towel, her back to me. When she finally turned, her eyes met mine, and for once there was no playful edge, no teasing smile. Just honesty. It is. Something inside me shifted. I'd never thought of her as lonely. She carried herself with so much composure, so much poise, that I assumed she had everything figured out. But in that moment, she wasn't just someone's mother. She was a woman, complex, layered, and quietly aching for something more. I took a breath, realizing it was my turn to open up. I get it, I said, my voice low. Not in the same way, but I know what it feels like not to be taken seriously. To have people look at you and decide you're too young, too inexperienced, like your feelings don't count yet. It makes you want to prove yourself, or at least, to be seen for who you are. Her gaze didn't waver. It was like she was weighing my words, searching them for truth. And when she nodded slowly, I felt a strange sense of relief, as though a bridge had just been built between us. For a long moment, we just stood there in the quiet kitchen, no words, no movement. Just two people who, in their own ways, understood what it felt like to be invisible. And when her hand brushed against mine as we both reached for the same glass, neither of us pulled away immediately. That single touch said more than either of us dared to. The kitchen had gone quiet, but the silence wasn't empty. It pulsed with something unsaid, the kind of quiet that pressed against you, heavy with possibility. She reached for a glass from the cabinet at the same time I did. Our fingers brushed, light at first, almost accidental. But instead of pulling back quickly, the touch lingered. Warmth spread through my hand, up my arm, and I knew she felt it too by the way her eyes flickered down before meeting mine again. Neither of us said anything. The moment stretched, fragile but electric. Eventually, she cleared her throat, withdrawing her hand with a soft laugh, though her eyes betrayed something deeper. "You're quick," she said lightly, as if to smooth over the tension. "Or maybe I just knew what you wanted," I replied, my voice lower than I intended. Her lips parted slightly, like she had a retort ready, but it never came. Instead, she turned to pour water into the glass, her movements careful, almost deliberate. I could see the faint rise and fall of her chest, the controlled rhythm of someone holding back. I leaned against the counter, watching her in the dim kitchen light. There was no rush in her gestures, no need to fill the silence with words. Just the sound of water, the ticking of the clock on the wall, and the quiet tension between us. When she finally handed me the glass, our fingers brushed again. This time, I didn't let go immediately. My thumb grazed against the side of her hand, barely noticeable, yet impossibly charged. Her breath caught, so faint it might have been missed if I hadn't been so close. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for a split second, everything around us disappeared. No house, no friend upstairs, no unspoken rules. Just her and me, standing far too close in a kitchen that suddenly felt smaller than it had minutes ago. She was the one to break the gaze first, stepping back with a soft smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You shouldn't play with fire," she murmured, though it sounded more like a warning to herself than to me. "Maybe I'm not afraid of getting burned," I said, surprising myself with the honesty in my voice. That pulled a laugh from her, gentle, almost nervous. She shook her head, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, though her fingers trembled just slightly. The facade of ease was still there, but I could see the cracks forming, the conflict flickering behind her calm exterior. We stood in that unsteady space for another moment, and then, as if sensing how close we were to stepping across a line, she busied herself with the dishes again. I didn't press. I couldn't. The last thing I wanted was to make her feel cornered. But even as she turned away, I knew she felt it too. The tension wasn't imagined, it was real, alive, pulsing in the small space between us. And though neither of us said another word, the memory of her hand beneath mine, of that breathless pause between us, burned itself into me. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't even an embrace. But in its own way, it was more dangerous than both. Later that night, after the kitchen had been cleaned and the house had settled into quiet, I found myself alone in the living room. A faint glow from the lamp in the corner softened the edges of the furniture, and the distant sound of my friend's laughter upstairs filtered faintly through the ceiling. She walked in a moment later, carrying a folded blanket. She paused when she saw me still sitting there, and for a heartbeat, we just looked at each other. Her expression shifted, surprise at first, then something else, something unreadable. "You're still up?" she asked softly, her voice low so as not to disturb the stillness of the house. "I couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Too much on my mind." She hesitated, then set the blanket down on the armchair and sat across from me. The air felt heavier with her so close, the space between us charged, like every glance, every movement carried more weight than it should. For a while, neither of us spoke. She smoothed the fabric of her sleeve with her hand, avoiding my eyes, until finally she whispered, "This isn't right." The words hung in the air, heavy but fragile. I leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees, searching her face. "Why does it feel so right then?" Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, and in them I saw the war she was fighting. She pressed her lips together, then shook her head slightly. "Because people would never understand. Because it would change everything." Her voice faltered, softer now. "Because I should know better." The honesty in her words hit me hard. She wasn't cold or distant, she was torn. I could feel the pull inside her, the push and pull between what she wanted and what she believed she couldn't allow herself to have. I swallowed, my chest tightening. "I can't ignore the way I feel when I look at you. It's not just attraction. It's more than that. You listen to me, you see me, in a way most people don't. And I don't want to pretend that doesn't mean something." Her breath caught, and for a second, she looked like she might cry. She leaned back against the couch, closing her eyes as if trying to steady herself. When she opened them again, they glistened. "You're young," she whispered. "You have your whole life ahead of you. I don't want to be the reason you make choices you'll regret." Her words were meant as caution, but they carried something else, a hidden confession, a desire she was trying to bury beneath reason. I wanted to reach for her hand, to tell her that regret wasn't something I feared when it came to her. But I didn't. I stayed in place, the tension pulling at both of us like invisible strings. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't empty either. It was the kind of silence that existed when words weren't enough to capture what was happening inside. We sat like that for what felt like forever, her battling her hesitation, me battling my restraint, both of us knowing that whatever line we stood on was dangerously close to breaking. And though nothing was said after that, the storm had already begun. I needed air. The weight of that living room silence pressed too heavily on me, so I stepped outside onto the porch. The night greeted me with a cool breeze, carrying the faint scent of rain even though the sky was clear. Above, the stars scattered themselves like secrets waiting to be spoken. I leaned against the railing, staring upward, trying to quiet the storm inside my chest. I thought I was alone, until the soft creak of the door behind me broke the stillness. She stepped out slowly, her cardigan pulled tighter around her shoulders. For a moment, she didn't speak. She simply stood beside me, close enough that the warmth of her presence brushed against my arm. The porch light cast a gentle glow over her features, highlighting the quiet conflict still etched in her expression. "You always come out here when you can't sleep?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Sometimes," I replied, glancing at her. "It's easier to think under the stars. They make everything else feel smaller." She followed my gaze upward, her lips curving in the faintest of smiles. "I used to do that when I was your age. I thought the sky held all the answers if I stared long enough." Her tone was wistful, almost fragile, and in that moment I realized how much she carried years of choices, responsibilities, sacrifices that had shaped her. And yet here she was, standing beside me, searching the same sky as if she were still waiting for something she hadn't yet found. We stood in silence for a while, the night stretching around us. Then, so softly I almost missed it, she said, "Maybe life is too short to keep denying what feels real." Her words sank into me, heavy and liberating all at once. I turned to look at her fully. Her eyes met mine, no longer guarded, no longer deflecting. They were open now, unshielded, shimmering with an honesty she had been holding back for too long. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my hand over hers on the railing. The warmth of her skin against mine was steady, grounding, yet trembling faintly beneath the surface. She didn't pull away. In fact, her fingers curled slightly, returning the touch as though she had been waiting for it. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The porch, the stars, the night itself bore witness to a truth neither of us could keep pretending away. Her shoulder brushed against mine, and I felt her lean just enough to close the space between us. Not fully, not recklessly, just enough to tell me she had made her choice. "I'm scared," she whispered finally, her voice raw. "So am I admitted. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." Her eyes softened, glistening with a mixture of fear and relief. She squeezed my hand gently, and in that moment everything shifted. The hesitation was still there, the uncertainty still real, but something had cracked open. Vulnerability had replaced resistance. And as we stood together beneath the stars, shoulders touching, hearts unsteady, I knew the night had changed everything. The night had grown quieter, as if even the world itself was holding its breath. The porch light hummed softly above us, and the stars seemed impossibly far away. Yet in that stillness, I felt closer to her than I had to anyone in a long time. She hadn't moved her hand from mine. Her thumb traced the faintest line across my skin, absent-minded but intimate, like she was memorizing the moment. Her eyes stayed on the horizon, but I knew her thoughts were far from the stars. "I don't know what this is," she whispered finally, her voice carrying the weight of honesty. "I don't know if it's fair. But I haven't seen like this in years." Her confession tightened something in my chest. I turned slightly toward her, searching her face. "Then let me be the one who sees you. Not as a mother, not as someone older, not as someone who's supposed to have everything figured out. Just you." Her lips parted as if to respond, but she didn't. Instead, she reached up, brushing her fingertips lightly against my cheek. The touch was so gentle it felt like a question, and I leaned into it, answering without words. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The closeness itself carried more weight than anything else could have. Her hand lingered, her gaze softening, and for a moment, the years between us melted away. But then, as though reality had crept back in, she pulled her hand back slowly, folding it into her lap. "I'm afraid of what happens tomorrow," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "Of what people would say. Of the complications this could bring." I swallowed, feeling the sting of her hesitation. Yet I also understood it. This wasn't a storybook moment where love erased every obstacle. This was real and messy, complicated and fragile. "I don't need to know tomorrow," I said softly. "I just need to know tonight wasn't a mistake." Her eyes glistened in the dim porch light as she looked at me, and a smile, gentle, hesitant, but genuine, curved across her lips. "It wasn't," she whispered. "Not at all." Relief washed over me, not because everything was solved, but because the truth had finally been spoken. We weren't pretending anymore. We weren't hiding behind casual words or fleeting touches. She leaned into me then, resting her head lightly against my shoulder. I froze for a moment, then let myself relax, wrapping my arm carefully around her. It wasn't passionate or desperate, it was quiet, steady, like two people finding comfort in the same storm. We stayed like that for a long time, saying nothing, just breathing in rhythm with one another. The night air cooled around us, but with her so close, I didn't feel the chill. Eventually, she lifted her head, her eyes meeting mine one last time. "I don't know where this leads," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But tonight, I'm glad you were bold." And in that moment, I didn't need promises or guarantees. The future was uncertain, yes, but the connection was real. And for me, that was enough.